On the night of April 3, 2026, somewhere inside a nondescript government building on the outskirts of Moscow, a room full of Russian intelligence officers stared at a screen they couldn't explain. A network they had spent 4 years building, a shadow logistics chain stretching across 3 continents, designed to funnel weapons, cash, and fighters into the Ukraine war without leaving a single traceable fingerprint, had just been blown open. Not by a spy, not by a defector, by Ukraine's own intelligence service, working with a coalition of European partners, using a method Moscow had specifically designed to be immune to. If you're new here and you care about what's really happening in this war beneath the headlines, hit like and subscribe right now, because this channel covers the moves that the mainstream coverage never gets to. Now let's get into it. On March 28, 2026, Ukrainian military intelligence, known as the HUR, publicly confirmed the dismantling of what they described as Russia's most sophisticated covert weapons transfer network since the Cold War. Not a single frontline supply route. Not a captured truck convoy. A structured, deliberate, multi-layered shadow war machine that had been operating invisibly since 2022, moving Iranian drones, North Korean artillery shells, Chinese dual-use components, and privately recruited mercenary fighters into the Russian war effort through a web of shell companies, falsified shipping manifests, and compromised port officials across 6 countries. The network had a name inside Russian intelligence circles. Ukrainian sources, citing intercepted communications reviewed by the Institute for the Study of War, revealed it was internally called Operation Grey Mirror. And Moscow had been so confident in its design that they had never even activated a contingency plan for its exposure. But the headline, Ukraine dismantles Russian shadow network, is not the real story. The real story is what the existence of that network tells you about the state of Russia's conventional military supply chain, why Moscow had to build something this secretive in the first place, and what its collapse means for every Russian offensive operation currently underway from Kharkiv to Zaporizhia. To understand why that matters, you first need to understand the system underneath it. To understand what Ukraine has just exposed, you first need to understand what Russia's logistics architecture actually looked like when this war began. In February 2022, Russia launched its invasion, assuming a 3 to 5 day operation. Its military supply doctrine, built on Soviet-era models and never fundamentally reformed, was designed for speed, not sustainability. The Russian army moved on the assumption that resupply would come in linear chains from fixed depots, massive warehouses built close to the border, feeding forward positions through road-based convoys. That model worked in short operations. It collapsed almost immediately against Ukrainian resistance that destroyed those depots with precision strikes, cut those road corridors, and turned every fixed supply node into a target. By mid-2022, Russia had suffered equipment losses that NATO analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, estimated would take a peacetime Russian defense industry 5 to 7 years to replace. The problem was that Russia was not operating in peacetime. It was in a war it had not planned to still be fighting. And so the Kremlin made a decision that would define the next 3 years of this conflict. It went underground, rather than attempt to rebuild its conventional supply chain transparently, which would have exposed the true scale of its losses and invited further Western sanctions. Russia constructed a parallel system, a covert procurement network designed to acquire what it could not produce domestically, disguise what it was acquiring, and deliver it through routes that bypassed every Western monitoring mechanism. This is the system Ukraine just tore open, and the detail that crystallizes everything about how that system worked is a shipping route that ran through the port of Bandar Abbas in Iran, through a transit hub in Armenia, and then overland through Azerbaijan into Russian-controlled territory, a route that on paper moved agricultural equipment and textile machinery, but was in reality carrying drone components, artillery propellant, and electronic warfare modules. That single corridor, according to HR sources cited by Kiev Post, moved an estimated $340 million worth of material between January 2024 and February 2026, not damaged, not disrupted. Destroyed. The corridor is gone, but the story goes even deeper. The Bandar Abbas route was only one strand of gray mirror. To understand the full architecture, you have to understand that Russia did not design this as a single pipeline. It designed it as a web deliberately redundant, deliberately obscured, deliberately compartmentalized so that the exposure of any one strand would not compromise the others. According to analysis published by the Center for Strategic and Praise International Studies, CSIS, in early 2026, Russia's shadow procurement network operated across at least 4 distinct geographic clusters. The first was the Iran-Caucasus corridor. The second was a maritime route, running through the Black Sea, and through Turkish intermediaries, companies registered in Istanbul and Trabzon, that had no visible connection to Russian state entities but whose beneficial owners, when traced through European financial intelligence databases, linked directly to individuals on the Kremlin's close advisory council. The third cluster operated through Central Asia, specifically through Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, where Russian-linked trading companies imported Western-manufactured, dual-use components that had been purchased legally in third countries and then re-exported eastward without the knowledge of the original manufacturers. The fourth and most sensitive strand ran through a network of private military contractors, not Wagner, which by 2026 had been largely absorbed into formal Russian military structures, but a newer generation of smaller, deniable groups, recruited through encrypted platforms and paid through cryptocurrency wallets that cycled through multiple jurisdictions before the funds could be traced. Now come to the arithmetic. Because the scale of what Gray Mirror was doing is the only way to understand why its collapse matters operationally, not just symbolically. Russia's domestic artillery shell production, according to NATO estimates released in late 2025, had reached approximately 250,000 shells per month, a genuine industrial achievement driven by the militarization of Russian manufacturing that Michael Kaufman and other leading analysts had been tracking since mid-2023. Ukraine, by contrast, was receiving approximately 150,000 to 180,000 shells per month from Western partners at peak supply periods in 2025, though that number fluctuated significantly with political delays in U.S. and European assistance packages. The shell gap was real and it was hurting Ukraine on the front line. But what the Gray Mirror network was doing was closing a different gap, Russia's gap in precision components. Domestic Russian production could manufacture bulk munitions at scale, what it could not manufacture at scale, because of Western sanctions on semiconductor and electronic component exports, were the guidance systems, the drone processing chips, the electronic countermeasure modules, and the advanced propellant chemistries that made those munitions effective at range and accurate under contested electronic warfare conditions. Gray Mirror was the solution to that specific problem. It was how Russia kept its precision strike capability alive even as sanctions closed off every official import channel and Ukraine just shut it down. The Gray Mirror story deserves to be told in its full art because it is the clearest case study of how Russia adapted its warfighting strategy when its original assumptions failed, and how that adaptation has now been systematically targeted and dismantled. It began not in 2024, when the network reached its operational peak, but in the summer of 2022, when Russian forces in eastern Ukraine began experiencing a problem that their tactical commanders reported upward through the chain of command. With increasing urgency, precision-guided munitions were running low. The Caleb cruise missile stockpile, which Russia had used liberally in the first months of the war to strike Ukrainian infrastructure, was being consumed faster than it could be replaced. The Iskander ballistic missile inventory was under similar pressure, and the domestic Russian defense industry, while capable of producing unguided rockets and artillery rounds in large quantities, did not have the supply chains in place to manufacture the high-precision electronic components those systems required at wartime scale. The reason was straightforward. Those components had for decades been sourced from Western suppliers. Sanctions had cut those supply chains overnight. Russia had approximately 6 to 18 months of stockpiled components, depending on the system type, and then it would face a genuine precision strike capability collapse, not a slowdown. A collapse. The Kremlin's response was to commission the construction of a covert acquisition architecture before that stockpile ran out. The first operational elements of what would become Grey Mirror were in place by early 2023. By mid-2023, according to European intelligence assessments cited by Radio Liberty, the network had already successfully imported over $1 billion worth of controlled technology through falsified documentation and intermediary companies. By 2024, it was running at full operational capacity, and Russian precision strike rates, which had dipped noticeably in late 2022 and early 2023, had recovered to levels that NATO analysts described as sustainably dangerous. The network had worked for 2 years. It had worked so well that Moscow had become structurally dependent on it. That dependency is now the source of the crisis. Step back now to the full campaign, because the dismantling of Grey Mirror did not happen in isolation. It was one operation within a broader Ukrainian strategic effort. What HRR Director Kyrylo Budanov described, in a rare public briefing in March 2026, as a campaign to attack Russia's war-sustaining infrastructure at its most vulnerable points rather than its most visible ones, Ukraine has, over the past 18 months, executed a series of strikes and intelligence operations that, taken together, represent something qualitatively different from the tactical frontline warfare that dominates news coverage. In September 2024, Ukrainian drones struck the Shahed production facility at Alabuga in the Republic of Tatarstan, deep inside Russian territory, far beyond any previous Ukrainian strike range, targeting the plant where Russia had been assembling Iranian drone designs under a technology transfer agreement. That strike did not destroy Alabuga, but it forced a production pause, triggered a security review that delayed deliveries for weeks, and critically sent a signal to every foreign partner supplying Russia through covert channels that their arrangements were not invisible. In January 2025, Ukrainian intelligence, working with unnamed European partners, executed a financial disruption operation against 3 Turkish shell companies that were serving as transit nodes for Russian component imports. Those companies were not bombed. They were exposed, their ownership structures leaked to investigative journalists, their transactions flagged to Turkish regulatory authorities, their beneficial owners named publicly. 2 of the 3 ceased operations within 60 days. In November 2025, a Russian logistics coordinator working inside the Central Asian strand of the network was arrested in a Central Asian country that has not been publicly identified. Reportedly, after Ukrainian intelligence passed his location and documentation to local authorities, he had, according to sources cited by ISW, been managing a flow of Western origin components through a Kyrgyz trading company for over a year. Grey Mirror's exposure in March 2026 was not a lucky break. It was the culmination of a 2-year targeting campaign that worked from the outside of the network inward, disrupting peripheral nodes, compromising intermediaries, tracing financial flows through European banking intelligence channels, and building a complete operational picture before moving against the core. The method matters as much as the result, because it tells you something important about how Ukraine is choosing to fight this war when it cannot match Russia on the front line in raw material terms. Here is the final strategic reality that the exposure of Operation Grey Mirror illuminates. Russia's war is sustainable only as long as its covert supply architecture functions. The domestic Russian defense industry, whatever its genuine achievements in scaling up artillery and drone production since 2022, remains structurally dependent on imported precision components for its most strategically important weapons, the long-range strike systems that threaten Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, and the electronic warfare systems that suppress Ukrainian drone and precision strike operations on the front line. Grey Mirror was not a secondary supply line. It was a critical dependency disguised as a secondary supply line. Its collapse does not end Russia's military capacity overnight, but it creates a precision component gap that will take months to route around. Assuming Russia can route around it at all, given that the European financial intelligence apparatus that helped dismantle Grey Mirror is now actively hunting for the replacement network before it becomes operational. The old assumption that Russia's covert logistics were too distributed and too compartmentalized to be systematically dismantled no longer holds. Ukraine has now demonstrated the method, refined it over 2 years of patient, operational work, and achieved a result that Moscow's intelligence services, according to intercepted communications reviewed by Ukrainian officials, had assessed as nearly impossible. The question now is whether the precision strike gap created by Gray Mira's collapse opens fast enough and stays open long enough to meaningfully affect Russian offensive capacity on the fronts that matter: Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, and the grinding attrition battle in Donetsk. Before Russia reconstitutes its covert supply infrastructure through new channels and new intermediaries, that is not a question anyone can answer with certainty today, but it is the most consequential operational question in this war right now, and almost nobody is covering it. If this kind of analysis is what you come here for, the moves beneath the moves, the systems behind the headlines, the strategic reality that the daily news cycle never reaches, then make sure you're subscribed and hit the like button. So, this channel keeps reaching people who want to actually understand what's happening in this war. What do you think the Gray Mirror collapse comes down to? Does Ukraine's campaign against Russia's covert supply chain change where this war ends? Or does Russia's capacity to adapt and reconstitute mean the front line stays frozen regardless? Tell me in the comments.